my professional life, I seldom wore necktie. I did last night. I learned early on that when you wear a necktie, it's supposed to reach from your collar to your belt line. Most of my life when I did that, that was air miles. Now it's ground miles. Ladies and gentlemen, we're privileged to have with us this afternoon one of the premier names in research. Without any further wait, come to your feet and welcome Dr. Jeff Meldrum.
Sasquatch was half a mile away. And I said, well, how did you know that he knew that he was scared? He said, oh, I'm psychic. And I said, well, then how come you didn't know which camp I was in? So, anyway. When Thom had invited me, well, I guess I better hold on to this because I do tend to want. When Thom invited me, I had mentioned, or he had mentioned, some interest in a project that was kind of stewing, and it's still stewing. That you may have seen some of this online and on Facebook. This Project Sasquatch, which is it'll be more than just entertainment. I hope it'll be if it ever develops, it'll be something that will provide an opportunity to kind of dig a little deeper into the stories and get to the bottom of the news items and past historical events. But as I said, it's still stewing, and it remains to be seen whether anything will ever come of that. So I was trying to think of some other things to talk about this afternoon, and I thought I'd emphasize a little more on this theme of the relic hominoid inquiry. As some of you may know, I finally managed to get an online journal launched. This is a scholarly, peer-reviewed journal, and emphasizing publications and reviews and commentaries from academics, with the dual purpose of providing a venue for academics to publish their research, but also in a field or in a circumstance where it sometimes is rather hostile to try to get your work on this subject published in mainstream journals, but yet still have the same standards of publication and peer review. But also in the process, as the editor, it allows me to involve individuals who might not otherwise take an active role, who may never submit a paper, into such a publication, but they would be willing to write a review of that manuscript, or to write a commentary about a news item or a development and its implications for the things that we're interested in. So with that thought, let's kind of embark it. Now, no one in this room, I'm sure, would question the fact that the wild man archetype is a widespread phenomenon. I wouldn't say universal, because if it were wholly or entirely universal, then one might argue that it was just a manifestation of the human psyche, that there was something about the human experience that required that drew out an expression of this imagery of this uncivilized, hair-covered human victor that frequented, that haunted the woods and the mountains. But it's not universal. We don't find peoples who inhabit the Sahara Desert having stories of wild men. We don't have people, in areas where there isn't an ecological basis for such a thing to exist. There's a remarkable correlation with the habitat. But it is very extremely widespread throughout history, and if we go back to even the earliest literary traditions of both Western and Eastern civilizations, Northern cultures, we find that the wild man plays a very prominent role. Hit something of a pinnacle and a zenith in the 11th through even up through the 15th, 16th centuries in Europe, where wild men were frequently depicted in all sorts of iconography. This is a beautiful inlay on a casket which now resides in a French museum, depicting this classic theme of the abduction of the human female by the wild men. In this case, she had her knight in shining armor arrive in the nick of time to run the beast through and save her from that fate. But also, if you're familiar with the traditions about the Green Man, that are widespread throughout Europe, and little icons of the Green Man are hidden away in various places. If you go into cathedrals, they're often festooned in little nooks and crannies. And the Green Man was sort of the consort of Mother Nature. He was the representation of the verdancy of the forest. And in early depictions, it was this face, this humanoid face peering out through the foliage. In later, much like this, in later depictions of the foliage then took on the actual face itself, or vice versa, the face took on the foliage. It was formed out of leaves and twigs and branches. And in later iterations still, the branches and leaves were issuing out of the mouth, as if the Green Man was the source of this greenery, the verdant wilderness. Well, could that tradition have started off with a vision like this, a wild man, some pre-modern hominid, peering out through the forest canopy at the activities? It reminded me of the depiction of Kelly's book showing the Sasquatch kind of peering from around the tree, watching the women grind the corn, interested in the sights and sounds and smells of human activity, that looking sort of through that window from outside. Science eventually came up alongside these folklore traditions, these the common knowledge of the common folk, and as Linnaeus began to catalog all of nature, his disciples, his students went out to collect specimens. Travelers returned with stories about man-like creatures, and they were readily accepted. It was anticipated, in fact, because as the notion of the great chain of being, this ladder of life, with each link going from the simplest of creation to the most complex, with humanity at the pinnacle, at the acme of creation, it was expected that there would be creatures found that sort of filled the gap. These were the missing links in this great chain of being. Because if creation was divine, it would be perfect in its completeness. And there was obviously, to most European observers, there was an obvious gap, a tremendous gulf between us and other animals they were familiar with, the deer, the cows, the pigs, the four-legged creatures. So when stories of man-like creatures, or anthropomorpha, began to arise, it was, can you all see, am I standing right in the way? It was perfectly accepted. Now, interestingly, there was, you can see here are the anthropomorpha laid out, and now, with 2020 hindsight, we can see, despite the slight anthropomorphism of some of these depictions, we can see recognizable species. So on the far right is the orangutan. In the center is the chimpanzee. And the walking stick is just an artistic tool to indicate that these creatures were a little bit tipsy on their hind legs. They couldn't really walk like us. And then we have you notice the tail in the third from the right here. That is actually a gelada baboon. It's quite obvious that you can see the little details. Did Thom make off with his pointer, by the way, or is it still up here? May still be here. I don't see it. All right, that's all right. Or was it? If that has a picture on it. Yep, there we go. Okay. So you can see the tail. You can see there's this little indication right here, almost looks like a little necklace. Well, that's a giveaway because the females of this species have a bare chest, and they have a string of little, or a line of vesicles that fill up with fluid, become quite tumescent during the estrus. Looks like a little glistening pearl necklace there on the neck. So even those details are quite evident. But the face is much more human-like, obviously, than this. But then we have the troglodyte, and Linnaeus placed real significance on this. And Boris Borzhnev in Russia used this as a jumping-off point to his thesis that there was another type of humanity, the troglodyte, that was parallel to Homo sapiens. And this was a hirsute creature that was mute, that was nocturnal, and that frequented the remote forested mountains. This example came from Southeast Asia. Well, the scientific community at large simply decided that this was sort of a derogatory depiction of native tribal peoples and to be ignored. So the question, so there was no modern primate species that was used as an analogy for that. But given the artistic license taken in the depiction, or the inaccuracy, if you will, say between this gelada and this figure was actually done by Mobius's depiction, one could ask, what does that actually represent? And could, in fact, the witnesses be trying to describe something much more hominin, primitive in characteristic? Could there be relic populations still out there? And we have stories, obviously, not just in North America, and I frequently ask, well, what about the Yeti, and what about well, there certainly is the possibility of more than one type. I'm quite confident that in North America we have just one, and until there is good evidence, good consistent evidence of additional species, I'm satisfied that we have one type. There may be some slight geographical variances, just as if you compared a Northern California black bear with a black bear in Alabama, there would be slight differences in their appearance. But there are other things like the little man, the orangutan deck in Southeast Asia, which has taken on some much more interesting significance since the discovery of Homo floresiensis. And even some mainstream scholars like Chris Stringer of the British Museum of Natural History, he made the comment that when he heard about Homo floresiensis, the first thing that came to mind was the remarkable potential parallel to the orangutan deck. The Londa Burrowing in India, the Yeren in China, of course, the wild man of Asia, or Western Europe, not Western Europe, but Eastern Europe, around in Siberia and all down to Mongolia, the Almaty perhaps. different potential types. It's kind of interesting when we go back and if you reread Ivan Sanderson's book and his categorization of different types of potential ABSMs, as he liked to call them, the abominable snowmen, he already was pointing to the fact that there were consistent arguments that could be made for the existence of multiple species. Now, multiple species, this is kind of interesting because in anthropology for a long time, one of the prevailing paradigms was what was called the single species hypothesis. This was the application of an ecological principle called Gauss's principle of competitive exclusion. That as the idea of a niche took shape, it was felt that the hominid adaptation was so unique that there could be only one hominid occupying that niche at any time. And so human evolution was seen as this linear progression, this linear succession, one species replacing the predecessor and so on down the road. That began to fall apart in the 1970s when evidence of multiple species of very primitive hominids. In this case, this actually depicts an early Homo, like Homo habilis, wielding his little stone tool here. Actually, this is a core, and they probably never used them like a hammer or a weapon like that. It was the flakes that they knocked off that core that were used as the fine cutting instruments. Here, encountering a robust Australopithecine in the savannas on the margin of the woodlands in eastern Africa. And so the single species hypothesis began to crumble. And it was interesting because, as always happens, to take a little sidestep and say, well, these were basically bipedal apes. And so they didn't have the cultural sophistication that later hominins. So it must not have been till Homo erectus that Homo erectus was the last hominin standing, and then it was a linear progression. Well, in reality, we found that later on there were also species coexisting with Homo erectus. There were still Homo habilis, there were robust Australopithecines in eastern and southern Africa, and that's probably just the tip of the iceberg. And so in the past, there were multiple species of hominid coexisting on the planet, in the landscape. They did have different ways of making a living so they could coexist. Their niches were partitioned. So there's this recognition of a growing bushiness of the hominid tree, and simultaneously there's growing evidence of the recent persistency of many of those species, those lineages. Now, I had the chance to witness one of these. I was over in China to study the fossil foot bones of not this particular hominid, but for all intents and purposes, it looks exactly like this. The specimen I was examining came from the site of Jinyushan, and it dated to about 400,000 years ago. Some of the original specimens that I was examining, the casts, and I wanted to see the originals, they were on display in the museum. And my host, Dr. Liu here, said, well, they're down in the museum, go down there. And while you're there, turn to the right and look in that display case. Tell me what you think of that. So I went and took a look, and here was this remarkably robust skeleton. The cranium, you can kind of see it. Granted, there's a break there, but still, there's no vertical forehead. There's a sloping forehead and very thick cranial bones, robust face, deep jaws, and receding chin, thick, long bones. In places there were breaks in the cortical bone. The dense bone forming the shaft is very, very thick. This is the specimen which was recovered from a site called Laishu. And he said it was just north of Beijing, and it dates to, right now the preliminary dates are between 12 and 20,000 years ago. Not hundreds of thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago. This is remarkable. I mean, so there were modern Homo sapiens here already by at least 75,000 years ago, if not earlier. Some of the dates are pushing that back to about 125,000 years ago in Eastern Asia. So what's interesting is, as this takes place, here's the discovery of Homo floresiensis with a date as recent as 13,000 years ago. We have some specimens in Java, in the isolated islands of Southeast Asia, that have dates that are much less than 100,000 years ago. We have this specimen that I just showed you from Laishu that's probably a Homo heidelbergensis, to possibly has 12,000. Just the other year, not this spring, but last spring, there was an announcement of a new discovery of a Neanderthal site in a cave not far from where I was over there in Russia, just adjacent to the Denisova cave, where Neanderthal remains have been discovered with preliminary dates of only 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago. So, Thom, your dates were a little bit out. I think you had an old edition of the book when you were studying. Neanderthals typically span for about 165,000 years ago, and recently thought to be, the most recent fossil bone is 32,000, although there are occupation sites that have been dated to as recently as 23,000. But now we're down to as young as 10,000 years ago for fossil bones associated with Neanderthal. 10,000, that's like thumbing through a book, or or fanning through the pages on a book, and having two pages stick together. I mean, that's a blink of the eye in geologic terms. And then there's this interesting discovery of the Homo denisova, or Denisova. They accentuate the second syllable. I also have trouble with that for some reason, I don't know why. But it's dated to about 20 to 40,000 years ago. And the DNA evidence indicates this was a distinct species. It was nested outside of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. In fact, Neanderthals are more closely related to Homo sapiens than they are to these very archaic humans of one time. And then we could add, I didn't get it onto the slide here, but the Red Deer cave site in southern China was recently announced, and they stopped short of suggesting this was a new species, but the skulls have a remarkable mosaic of primitive and derived characteristics, and they are in the process of trying to extract DNA and see where they fall. But the suggestion is that there was another wave, or another subgroup of hominids, primitive humans, whose relationship to modern human populations is not clearly known. Now, these themes were kind of explored. If you've seen the documentary Bigfoot, The Definitive Guide, and I had nothing to do with choosing that title, but I had a great time. For once, I wasn't one of the lone voices crying in the wilderness. I had some cohorts, and most of them were very sympathetic. The resident skeptic was Bill Sellers. He was kind of a hard sell, but he did make the concession. He said when he was called up by the producers, he told the producers, if you'd called 5 years ago, I would have told you to go jump in the lake. But given the recent spat of discoveries like Homo floresiensis, he said, anything's possible. Sure, count me in. So he participated. So we had Ian Redmond, who's a primatologist and conservationist. He was the UN ambassador to the Great Apes during the year of the Great Ape. And then some of you may now know Anna Nakaris. She's at Oxford Brookes. She is also a primatologist specializing in nocturnal primates in Southeastern Asia. And she recently got a grant. She's doing work in northeastern India now. So in addition to her stories that she's accumulating about the orangutan in Southeastern Asia, she's now very interested in stories about the Mande Barum, which appears to be a Sasquatch-like creature in the jungles of forests of northeastern Asia. And then Rick, I'm sorry, I just got blank on his name. But he's a geochemist up at McMaster University and has been involved. He appeared in one documentary dating some of the Gigantopithecus and got us all excited. It got me all excited because he had a preliminary press release, a preemptive press release, and suggested that the dates of the Gigantopithecus material he was working with were 200,000 years old, which was half the age of previous, the previous youngest specimens, and so we nudged it that much closer. Turns out they were all 300,000 years old, but still, that's a wink of the eye. Jack Rink, there we go. I get it. Now, just the other day, a week ago, literally, I had lunch with Brian Sykes. Brian Sykes is a professor of human genetics at Oxford University. Actually, he's retired now, so he's emeritus. And he has a company that where you can actually take a swab and take some saliva and cells from your cheek and send them in, and he'll tell you what your genealogy is in very broad brushstrokes. Brian is known for a number of books. Some of you may recognize The Seven Daughters of Eve. groups, at least in Europe and Western Asia, you may have been derived from. Most recently, and it washed out completely, didn't it? The title of this book is DNA USA, and he was over here on a book tour signing and talking about his book, where he looks at the remarkable melting pot that the United States is, and he did chromosome studies of a couple dozen individuals that were sampled at random, totally random, and he shows their photographs, and you look at one and given their facial features and so forth, you might guess a certain type of ethnicity or extraction, and when you look at their chromosomes, there's smatterings of every other group you could imagine. So an African American in the South had Native American genes mixed in there, and some European, and vice versa. It just showed that there's tremendous gene flow, and a lot of our genealogy many of us would be surprised. He was also known for his work with the Iceman, who was found up in the Alps, and also the Cheddar Man in southern England, where they found a skeleton and they were able to get DNA from it. The skeleton dated to about 40 or 50,000 years ago. And they sampled individuals in the village, in the community there adjacent to the archaeological site, and they found one of this fossil's lineal descendants still living there in the village. Pretty amazing. So in any case, one other footnote, you may have known of Brian Sykes without realizing it. There was interest in some hairs that were brought back from Bhutan by a British production company, and when they were delivered to Brian Sykes for analysis, he said, we found some DNA in it, but we don't know what it is. It's not a human, it's not a bear, nor anything else we have so far been able to identify. It's a mystery, and I never thought this would end in a mystery. We have never encountered DNA that we couldn't recognize before. And myself included have cited that example as this roadblock, or this hurdle that we keep running into when we try to do DNA analysis on some of the Sasquatch remains. Well, eventually they did successfully get the DNA sequence. It turned out to be a bear. So you have to put a footnote there with reference to that event. But Brian has taken an interest in this project. His next writing project is going to examine gene flow in early human populations. So he's going to really look closely at what was the genetic relationship between Neanderthals and humans, between Denisovans and Papua New Guineans, where it appears that there are some remnant links or ties there. And since he got wind of some of the, in my opinion, very premature rumors about potential hybridization as an origin for Sasquatch, he was interested in that, and I advised him that I thought it was extremely unlikely that such hybridizations had occurred, and that the evidence was non-existent at this point, but the question was out there, and so it was worthy of examination. And so I've already sent him a few hair specimens, and he's going to do some preliminary work and take a look at that and see what he finds, and he's very eager. We were supposed to just have lunch together on Saturday. We spent the entire afternoon visiting, and he's very eager to pursue this. So we have an opportunity for an interesting parallel test, an independent confirmation or qualification of Dr. Ketchum's study, which is very desirable. I mean, that's how science progresses, is through replication, confirmation of results. So, I don't want anyone to think that we're trying to do an end run, or that we're in competition, or we're trying to get the brass ring before her. It's not that at all. It's just that there needs to be independent corroboration. And given Dr. Sykes' credentials and reputation, having an individual like that actively involved in this is the best thing we could ask for. So one of the themes that has come up, and this has been, it's always interesting, there's so many different opinions, and in many cases they are that, they're opinions, as to what Sasquatch is. What's the nature of this species? Is it an animal? Of course, as was pointed out, we're animals. We sometimes neglect to recognize that. But the question is, are we dealing with something that's more near human or more near ape? Is it hominin in the modern terminology? humans since the divergence from the last common ancestor shared by chimpanzees and humans. Whereas now the term hominid has been relegated to the family Hominidae, which includes us and the African apes. Hominini is a tribe term to narrow it down to just those direct ancestors and immediate relatives since the divergence from the chimpanzees. The term hominoid, which I insisted that we use in the journal title, comes from the superfamily Hominoidea, which includes all of the great apes and humans. Actually, all of the apes, including the lesser apes and humans. Because, the question of maybe of the Gigantopithecus model, we don't even know where Gigantopithecus really fits in, whether it's an exclusive near relative to the Asian ape, the only ape we have in Asia, the orangutan, or whether it's more closely related to a gorilla or chimpanzee, which doesn't mean that it had to have originated in Africa, because the ancestors of our modern African apes actually evolved in Asia Minor from a group called the Dryopithecines, which were widespread across southern Asia and Europe, but then migrated into Africa along with things like giraffes. Did you know that giraffes evolved in Europe, in Asia? Not in Africa, but in Asia. A lot of the East African fauna that we associate with visions of the Serengeti actually evolved in Asia and migrated down from land bridges during the latter part of the Miocene and Pliocene. So near human, near ape. Well, what are the criteria? What are the criteria that we use to measure those qualities? And I don't think it's an either or. We're talking about a continuum. We're talking about characteristics that have a continuous variation of expression or degree of expression. There was an individual who called into a radio talk show, and she said, well, when this thing walked away from me, it turned and looked at me, and it grinned. And only humans can grin, right? So it must be a human. Well, not necessarily. I mean, if you think about the Bouquois masks, the depiction, the wild man of the woods, the characteristic expression is the mouth, this muscular mouth pulled back to expose these even teeth in this young chin. And it has many different meanings when we talk about language and the interpretation of the meaning of those words. Facial expressions likewise have subtleties. This one is probably, he may be in trouble. And we do that sometimes too. When we grin at someone, we smile at someone, a stranger walking down the street, it's nice to think that it's a friendly gesture, but in reality, it's a submissive gesture. We're saying, hey, I won't hurt you if you won't hurt me. Breasts. They point to the obvious pendulous breasts on Patty, and they say, well, only human females have pendulous breasts, therefore, since Sasquatch is sometimes described as having breasts, they must be human. Well, a lactating gorilla has a bust line that, many women might be quite envious of. And that could well be that Patty exhibits this, is quite buxom because she may have just given birth. I actually had, and I'm not saying don't quote me on this, I'm just saying that a student of mine came in one day, and I have an 11 by 14 print of the 352 frame that I bought from Roger Patterson and the Northwest Research Association when I was 11 years old after seeing the movie and meeting him at the Spokane Coliseum. And I have that frame, and it's hanging on my wall in the office, and one of my dental students came in. His wife had just given birth because he had just missed his exam and had to make it up. He comes up, he looks up and he says, oh look, she just had a baby. He said, what? He said, well, she has that Dunlap syndrome where the belly Dunlap overdeveloped. And it sure does, and it comes right back, and then it blends into the midriff right here. It doesn't go all the way around like a shirt hanging out of the costume, as has been suggested by some critics. But if, those of you who have experienced that or witnessed that, all that stretched skin for a while, it kind of hangs there loosely. And that would explain her very obvious breasts, because you also know that after childhood, the milk comes in, and that postpartum engorgement makes those breasts quite prominent. So that's one possible suggestion. I'm not saying that Eric Beckjord was right, that there was a little baby crawling around on her so they must be human. Well, we know from the hominid fossil record that early hominids, lots of the diversity of early hominids were walking bipedally. They were actually doing it in many different ways. And some great apes are quite capable, or all great apes are quite capable of what we call facultative bipedalism. That means they can stand up on their hind legs. I mean, your pet dog can stand up on its hind legs and hop around. That would be facultative bipedalism rather than habitual. This is quite an interesting. This is Am Bam, who got some notoriety recently when a little clip of him walking on his hind legs. And apparently he really likes to do it, does it a lot. His keepers say that he likes to carry things around, and he gets that very straight back because they don't have a lumbar lordosis, and they have a very different arrangement of the hip. This is their hip bone, clear up here. They have an iliac blade that's very long and narrow by comparison to ours, and fore and aft facing rather than curling around to the side. But you can see the hip socket's about here. It's kind of hard to see. It makes it look really squat because of this huge hamstrings and the tuft of hair on the back of the leg. But the hip bone, or the hip socket would be right about there, and the knees right there. But they have this remarkably high intramembral index. You can have a high intramembral index by having extremely long upper extremities or by having relatively short lower extremities. And the gorilla has both. It has short, lower, long, upper, which gives it a very high. But the similarities are really quite remarkable and striking. And some of the contrasts, and you can see how his trapezius muscle goes clear up to the top. The nuchal plane is very almost vertical there, and the spine comes in at the back. Whereas here, it kind of comes up and it sort of tapers off right there, about halfway up. It doesn't make it quite up to the peak. And it's hard to tell whether, again, as was pointed out, whether this is, it's not a top knot. At least there's no string tying it up there. But there's hair, and you can, and granted, you do see in some of the frames that hair kind of rise and fall and bob. And if you've ever seen a chimpanzee that's agitated, they have what's called piloerection. The hair stands on end, and it looks like the pictures of the little fine-haired blonde girl with her hand on the what's it called, the Van. I can't remember the name of it. I didn't mean to talk about this, or if you take a balloon when you're a kid, you rub your hair stands out, straining all over the place. That's what these chimpanzees look like. If you haven't seen a picture in my book, there's a depiction of a chimpanzee all upset doing this, and the hair is standing on end, which gives them the appearance of being much bigger and bulkier than they actually are. But there's details of anatomy that are remarkably comparable, but I won't get into a time sink there. Now, there are also suggestions that there are other qualities, other aspects, that they're telepathic, that they're psychic, they have other paranormal qualities. And all I can say is that these are based on extremely subjective personal experiences. They are not empirical evidence, and therefore I can't evaluate them. I can listen to these stories. This gentleman that was conveying his information across a half-mile distance, but they remain that. They remain that, and it's just important to keep that in perspective. So if I chide or if I prod for a little more objectivity, it's not to diminish those personal experiences. It's just to encourage everyone to realize that it is subjective. And if one of our goals collectively is to garner more scientific recognition of this phenomenon, it would behoove us not to place those experiences on the forefront, but rather to look for very critically look for replicable evidence. A gentleman in here very astutely pointed out, and I told him I'd probably use this phrase, but we should be seeking to explain our experiences and not to justify them. So, but no judgment passed on that. And then there's the issue of language too. Now, I think that Scott's studies are fascinating. I'm not quite sure yet what to make of them myself, but in considering them, we should also remember that great apes are capable of language, not vocal, articulate language. But as we all know now, they are able to master sign language or symbolic language. This is Kanzi over here. This is actually Min, from those very first early studies with sign language in chimpanzees. And you know, the wheels in there are turning, and they're very cognizant of their surroundings and their interactions with other people and social settings and so forth. They're capable of deceit, of lying, they're capable of laughing, doing all sorts of things. So I get a little impatient, I guess, if fair word, when people say, well, these aren't apes. I mean, that expression suggests to me that that person probably doesn't really understand or isn't very familiar with what it is to be an ape. I mean, we're all hominoids and we share many, many characteristics in common, both mentally as well as physically. So where do they fit? I mean, where do they fall? If this is a simple phylogeny with the branching patterns of here's the orang, here's the gorilla, here's the chimp, here's the Homo sapiens. Unless I'm in trouble at home and something else. So if Gigantopithecus, for example, is a near neighbor to the orangutan, then Sasquatch may fall out somewhere as a sister group to this branch on that phylogeny. If it has ties more closely allied with the African apes, because you can't help but look at that picture of Patty and think of a gorilla with long legs, as you saw in that comparison with Edban. And that's not so far-fetched as I pointed out. It could actually have closer genetic ties to African apes, in which case it would fall somewhere here, either with the African apes. But if it's up here on this lineage, if it's nearer to humans than it is to any other living representatives of the hominoidea, then it would be a hominin of some kind on the branch, since the last common ancestor with chimpanzees, which are thought to have diverged 5 to 7, probably closer to 7 million years ago. But if that were the case, and that's a possibility that I certainly entertain, my working hypothesis, my null hypothesis, and that's an important distinction to make, because people say that I'm in the Gigantopithecus camp. Well, it's not like that. I'm not advocating, I'm not studying for a hypothesis. I have a working hypothesis that I continue to test, and you attempt to refute the hypothesis before you set it aside. For me, the simplest explanation is that of an ape, and I'll show you why I think that. But I'm perfectly willing, and it's not a concession on my part if I abandon that hypothesis in the face of new data. Like on the internet, there's been all kinds of chatter. Well, Meldrum's been kind of backpedaling, with the rumors about ketchup, and he's starting to say, well, maybe it could be this or it could be that. Well, I've always said that. It's not about me or my reputation. But when the genus Homo appeared, where we really can use the word human, sometimes it's politically correct to refer to all hominids as humans, and even some of my colleagues have succumbed to that political correctness, and it's a misleading, misguided notion, I think. But when the genus Homo emerged, the distinguishing characteristic that defines that, because there's not much difference in brain size, just a few tens of cc's of gray matter there, it's the appearance of an archaeological record, a tool culture, a collection of manufactured items that are repeated through time. Okay, and so when we get, and that becomes ever more sophisticated from the time that Homo first appeared 2.5 million years ago until the present. So if we look at this artistic rendering of Cro-Magnon, a modern Homo sapiens in Europe, say 20, 30,000 years ago, he's got quite a bunch of stuff. Now you've heard me talk about this. George Carlin used to have a stand-up routine where you talk about his stuff. You go on trips, you get your favorite stuff, you put it in the suitcase, you get to the hotel, first thing you do is take out your bathroom stuff and your bedroom stuff. We don't seem to be able to exist and to function in the physical environment without all kinds of accoutrements to go along with it. Well, when we look at Sasquatch, when we look at Patty, if that's a good representation, what's missing? She doesn't have any stuff, or if she does, she's stashed it somewhere. She hasn't taken her her little fanny pack with her. You know, there is no cultural accoutrements like we see with Homo. So if this is anywhere allied or parallel to Homo, it's a total different form of humanity. And some would say, yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, let's not go there. Okay. Now, one other possibility, I'm going to show that where it's possible that it is a hominid, but it would have to then be a branch that comes off. I forgot what time we started, so you'll have to give me some tickets. 10 minutes? Okay, all right, I'll hustle it. It would have to come off from that hominid lineage at a point prior to the appearance of Homo. And one interesting possibility is the Paranthropus, or the robust Australopithecines. Australopithecus boise in East Africa, its analog in South Africa. Now, this is an interesting, there we go, there's emphasis there. And then here's an interesting demonstration. Here's a composite of Australopithecus boise, the robust form in East Africa, and here's a close-up of pattern. Now look at the remarkable coincidence of those landmarks, the peak of the head, allowing for the hair and the shadow in the background a little bit, the brow, the orbit, the zygomatic arch, the root zygomatic arch, the cheekbone in other words, and then the nasal aperture, the occlusal plane, the gonial angle, the angle back here at the jaw, the deep lower mandible. You can even see this heavy shadow right here, and the highlight here on this tremendous masseter muscle that comes up to the zygomatic arch there. This creature is distinguished from Homo. Instead of becoming more sophisticated, there's questionable association of primitive tools like digging sticks associated with sites occupied by fossils of this species. But instead of becoming more sophisticated, manipulating the environment with tools, they got heavier jaws. So they chew their way through the environment. They have shortened faces and tremendous emphasis on the posterior dentition. So look at the difference here's the canine tooth right there. These are the premolars and these are the molars. Look at the difference in size between that and a modern human. And so we call this adaptation durophagy. They eat durable, hard items. Now, and so I wanted to make sure I said the flattened face then emphasizes greatest compressive forces due to the arrangement of the muscles on the post-canine dentition back here on these big, heavy teeth with very thick enamel. Now, those same now here's the interesting thing. These fossils, this species was first described in the late 1970s. This was filmed in 1967. Now, if you were going to posit an unrecognized hominid living in the western United States in the temperate forests of North America, this is exactly the adaptation of the chewing apparatus that would reasonably be predicted. And yet it was unknown in 1967. If Patterson or someone else were simply concocting a costume, what would they call that independently? Or did they inherit that from a Gigantopithecus ancestor or a robust Australopithecine ancestor? Just very quickly, because I am running out of time. There's a lot of talk out there, literature out there talking about Gigantopithecus being a bamboo specialist, and that's why it went extinct, because the bamboo forest shrank and it didn't have any more food and it died off there at the end of the Pleistocene. Well, it made it through the worst parts of the Pleistocene already, and the giant panda survived just fine. Well, not just fine. They're threatened and so forth, but on the brink of extinction. But nevertheless, why did this dull-witted bear survive when a crafty, generalized giant ape did it, or did it not? In reality, much better studies were done on the teeth, and particularly the molars. This is to illustrate another point, but on the molars, that indicated that they weren't specializing in the pits and scratches weren't anything like those of the panda, but they were much more like that of a chimpanzee, which is very Catholic in its diet. It eats about everything. So from vegetation and fruits right on up to meat. incisors are here to show that the incisors are heteromorphic. Central incisors like ours are more shovel-shaped and larger and wider than are the lateral incisors. That's the key. That's an indicator of a frugivorous ancestry, a fruit-eating ancestry. Primates that specialize completely in plants and leaves, where much more of the processing is done. The post-canine teeth have more peg-like incisors, less shovel-shaped. So we call them homomorphic. But another interesting thing, and this kind of ties into the question that was raised about the jaw movements, the potential jaw movements in Sasquatch. Gigantopithecus has canines that don't project. They wear tip to tip, and so in an adult, they don't project beyond the occlusal plane. And so when you see those bared teeth of the bucquois, they don't have projecting canines. In fact, when we look, here's an example, a much more realistic mask, not so stylized, and in all features it's very similar to an ape, except in the lack of the projecting canine. Now the Native Americans were obviously aware of those distinctions, and they depicted them properly and accurately in things like bears. So why would they be omitted here, unless they had some model upon which to base it? But the point is the lack of the interlocking projecting canines allows for much greater mobility of the jaw. We have a chewing cycle that is sort of circular. We can have side-to-side and forward retraction and protraction of the jaw when we're chewing and when we're speaking. And the canines, the lack of projecting canines, help to facilitate that. All right, I'm going to jump ahead here just a little bit. So, Gigantopithecus, I've shown this slide frequently. The hypothesis of Gigantopithecus crossing the Bering Land Bridge being the source. We could add to that. I was always reluctant to before because it seemed like a stretch to say that robust Australopithecines, given their similarities, might be a source. They got bigger and bigger through time, through the Pleistocene, came to North America. Now it's not so far-fetched because down here in the island of Flores was discovered the Hobbit. And although it was dubbed Homo floresiensis, and you noticed in my figure I had Homo in snigger quotes because it has a brain smaller than a chimpanzee. And the arguments for the association of tools were really, really lame. And despite the fact that it was published in Nature, and the tools are the most crude types of tools you could imagine, really, for anything. But the point is, nevertheless, there is serious discussion. And in fact, when I reviewed the paper for the Journal of Scientific Exploration, I noted that what was published on the postcranials looked just like chimpanzees. They had a tibia that looked remarkably like a chimpanzee, looked nothing like a modern human in any dimensions. And that was picked up by other people, and that the physical anthropology means there were serious discussions. This could be a relic, late Australopithecine, which otherwise we only know from Africa. If that's the case, whatever it is, it spread from, presumably originally from Africa, whether it's a hominin, or whether it's a Homo, whether it's an Australopithecine or an early Homo, it got down into there from here. So to think that a much more recent, robust Australopithecine could also have spread out of Africa simultaneously is not nearly so far-fetched. Now, you all know about the Bering Land Bridge, right? And when I say Bering Land Bridge, I'm sure that the vision that comes to most of your minds is this: a frozen Arctic wasteland with muskox, maybe we throw in a woolly mammoth or a rhinoceros, and a band of Paleo-Indians waving the spears and bear skins, running after these herd animals, right? Well, you'd be surprised to know, perhaps, that in reality, from the late Pliocene all the way through the late Miocene, through the Pliocene, and then it began to deteriorate after the Pliocene. But even as the Ice Ages set in, there were times when the Bering Land Bridge looked like this. It was continuous forest habitat from central China all the way to British Columbia. One habitat. Now, you're all probably familiar with the little red panda, the little raccoon-looking panda, which was part of the fauna that is found in the cave sites where Gigantopithecus teeth are found. Its teeth have been found here in Washington State, as well as across the Sound. So if a little red panda made it over, didn't have to brave an Arctic wasteland to get here, certainly could imagine that Gigantopithecus might have. And in fact, what's interesting megafauna, most of the evolution of these species took place in the northern latitudes, not in the tropics. And so it stands to reason that while taphonomic bias has skewed our notion of where Gigantopithecus might have been, I mean, we're basing that knowledge on two skulls, or two crania, two mandibles, and a few thousand isolated teeth, all of which were carted into limestone caves by porcupines, where they could be preserved. And interestingly, porcupines weren't extant north of the Yellow River in China. So if you don't have caves and/or you don't have porcupines, you shouldn't expect to find fossils of Gigantopithecus. So why else would a large ape become gigantic, if not for the same reasons that all the other places in megafauna, to better exploit northern latitudes, where the resources were a little coarser, a little less nutritious, and where gigantism would allow gigantothermy, or in other words, sequestering body heat in a large core. And so here's examples of that. Of course, the Columbian mammoth that's about 50% bigger than an African elephant, evolving in the northern latitudes. I wanted to just show this. This is showing a simplified graph showing elephant evolution. There are dozens and dozens of species of elephant, and the majority of them were in the northern latitudes. And today, where do we find elephants? In tropical Africa and tropical India. Just like at one time there were dozens and dozens of species of apes all across, well, not into the, well, but all across the old world. Known species across the old world, but today all we have are these relic populations in tropical refugia in Africa and Southeast Asia. Okay, here's the remnants. All right, let's jump ahead here. I'm going to go past this because I'm running out of time. Now, one other thing. What's interesting is just as the Patterson film predated or anticipated the discovery of Zinjanthropus, the robust Australopithecus, there are other behaviors that are attributed to Sasquatch that seem to anticipate behaviors that were subsequently discovered in great apes. So traditionally, Sasquatch are known to have a fancy for fish, right? Eating salmon from smokehouses and drying rats. But wait, apes don't eat fish, do they? Well, until just a few years ago, when there was a documentary called Orangutan Island. These orangutans were being rehabilitated to be reintroduced into the wild. And so they're in a semi-natural setting, and there was a flood, and catfish were stranded in these little puddles all over the island. And the orangutans came down out of the trees and started fishing the catfish out, and literally fishing them out. And the observers thought they were just playing, just some novelty to play with them, and they started eating them. They systematically cleaned up all the catfish, eating them. And I was stunned, and I talked to my colleague Esteban Sarmiento, who does field work in Africa, told him about this, and he even heard anything like this. He said, oh yeah. He said the bonobos that he observed, they'd get right down in the streams and herd the fish up into the shallows and flick them on the banks and eat them. I went through all my books, I went through my reprints, I got online and Googled and did Google Scholar and searched. Not a single printed reference to eating fish or piscivory in great apes out there. And yet, the Native Americans have been telling us this. And, okay, 1 minute, you're going to hold me to it, huh? So, if they were out there, the Native Americans would have seen them, right? And they'd surely depict them, if even in a stylized fashion. So, bear in mind, there is no myth without history, and no history without myth. Now, this is a really interesting one. A friend of mine who's a member of the Bannock tribe there on the Fort Hall Reservation is quite an accomplished artist. And he grew up in Nevada, and as a youngster, his grandparents told him stories about the Zavits, or the eater of children. And the tradition was that during extremely hard winters, you had to be very careful where you left your children or let them out to play, because the Zavits would grab them. And there was a story he told of big hairy arms, kind of like that old movie where the Yeti reaches in under the tent border and grabs the rifles. If you've seen that one, I can't next to the border of the tent, of the teepee. So here's that theme in his depiction here. Now, a just so story, is this just, oh, and also, some of you may be familiar with the Jobich Canyon of Nevada. And they have a long-standing tale about the Jobich monster. Well, Jobich is a corrupted form of the Shoshone word for Zavitz. And the European settlers would say, why are you down here in the sagebrush? We've got this beautiful mountain range and all these meadows and everything. Why don't you go up there? Oh, no, we don't go up there because that's where the Zavitz is. You know, we go there in groups to hunt, but we don't live there. Again, a just so story. Well, in Uganda recently, a couple of years ago, there was a report that children were being snatched by chimpanzees and eaten, partially eaten, well, sometimes partially, sometimes not. This isn't the guilty culprit, but he kind of looks at it. I was first told this by Owen Caddy, who some of you may know, who was witness firsthand to one of these incidents, and they kind of kept it hush-hush because it was so gruesome. But then, about 6 months later, there was a news article that was released, and they said that over a 7-month period, there were 12 instances of child snatches by these chimpanzees because the drought was wreaking havoc with everybody, including the chimps. And if they found a little kid sitting under or lying under a tree, fast food. I don't mean to make light. But the point is, what might seem like a just so story actually has a possible basis in a real event. Okay, footprints. Well, we're going to cut this out. Let me see if there's something I absolutely have to tell you. I'm sorry, I just got too much stuff here. We'll go through that. Okay, so I don't get to talk about footprints. We'll do that. Well, one thing, many of you probably already know about the metatarsal break, and I'm talking about that significance. But you may not have heard the report about the Chinese experience that I had. On another trip to China, I had the opportunity to talk to a witness who had a sighting. And he saw something not too different from this. His wasn't a female, but it was a dark, he described it as being a little darker than this, browner, but kind of a rusty brown color. He saw it from a couple hundred yards. It was sunning itself in an open spot, but he yelled across the canyon to it. He was a ranger in a nature reserve in Hubei province, the famous Shenanjian Nature Reserve. When he yelled, it sat up and turned and looked at him. He was expecting to see a bare snout. No ears on top, no snout, flat face. It stood up and walked away on 2 legs. He eventually tracked it and found its footprints and made casts beside a spring where it had squatted down apparently to get a drink, and so it rocked forward on the forefoot, and it left a set of remarkable footprints which I was stunned bear resemblance to the titmus cast that shows the very pronounced mid-tarsal pressure ridge. This is just stunning, because it's not just that there is a ridge there, but you can see the skeletal anatomy pushing through the soft tissue. The configuration of the pad there on the forefoot right in front of that is identical. The orientation, the slight angle of the inclination, which has to do with the position of the 2 joints involved there, the talonavicular joint and the calcaneocuboid joint. You can see it in profile. This one just has more plaster, but it's identical. Now, what are the odds? This guy didn't know anything about Sasquatch. He lived in a cinder block house with a corrugated steel roof. He was a very humble fellow there, and he even asked through the interpreter, "Is there anything like the Sasquatch in America, in the United States, or anything like the Yeren, as they call it, the wild man," which literally means wild man. Okay, and then there's just one interesting footnote. Cliff Barrettman, sorry, wrong Cliff. Cliff Barrettman made contact with the Crew brothers. These are the sons of Jerry Crew, famous for that cast, probably the first plaster cast of a Bigfoot print in the United States. And there it is. They still have it. It's it's suffered a little bit of wear and tear, but it's wired here into this shadow box. And so through Cliff graciously sharing this information, I was able to, since my physical anthropology meetings this year were in Portland while I was there, I made an appointment and went over and spent a few hours with John. And he very graciously opened up the box and clipped it and let me take some photos. But look at this, when you see the cleaned up version, this one still has the wires on this one. When you see the cleaned up version, notice this kind of shadowy area right across here. And here it's compared to the Titmus cast. And I'll highlight it, not to over-suggest, but look at the pressure, the differential pressure on the forefoot. Now, it's not nearly as distinct as this one is. I mean, this one's on that very eroded slate. It's not granite sand, but eroded slate, very angular slate on the Bluff Creek sandbar. This was on the road that Jerry had just bulldozed and graded, and then parked his cat across it so that it wouldn't be disturbed. And then the tracks came out across the pressure-treated road and around the Caterpillar. But even this cast shows that evidence of that mid-tarsal break. So the relative hominoid inquiry, looking at, you can visit that. It's at the ISU webpage. So it's www.isu.edu/RHI. And I have some cards over there if you're interested in taking that with you. I think that this shows that there is much more than just a provincial folklore legend associated with this subject. And it is gaining much greater acceptance in the mainstream scientific community as the recognition of the tremendous bushiness of the hominid fossil tree combines with the recognition of the greater recency of persistence of many of these lineages. Instead of seeing us as the last hominid standing, as was the title of an episode in a documentary series, Nova documentary series, and they posed the question. It was so funny because they were actually exploring the theme of multiplicity, contemporaneity of multiple species. And then in the last episode they said, but here we are, the last hominid standing. And they just kind of rhetorically posed the question, well, why would we be the last? And of course they say, well, it's because of our culture and this and that. And I couldn't help but remember back to the argument, well, the Australopithecines, they were kind of simple. It was by Homo erectus. It was the only hominid standing.